Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. I have to say I've been excited to talk about this artist because of how many times she's redefined her artistic expression, to the point where if you want to properly describe her sound to somebody, you have to pick a certain period of her life to do so. From dirty power trio rock to a lacerating yet bluesy grace to the more meditative, poetic approach of her later years, she is a truly multifaceted artist. I'm of course talking about Dorset's PJ HARVEY. A thoughtful and articulate presence, not just in terms of her music, but outside of her art as well. Just watch any interviews where she's discussing her art, and it's a very thoughtful, thought-provoking experience. She's also been incredibly successful in the music world. She's the only artist to have ever won 2 Mercury Music Prizes, and she's also been awarded an MBE for outstanding services in music. In some ways, she can appear as a contradiction. Certainly earlier on in her career, she was making music that had gnashing teeth, and then later on it became less of a gnash and more of a wicked grin, some kind of undercurrent of danger bubbling. And I think that can sometimes feel at odds with the person who is making the music. When being interviewed, what you get is a kind-hearted, unassuming yet kind of guarded presence. She doesn't like talking about her art too much, and so she's been very careful about what she said to journalists ever since the early days, where she was much more candid and open about her artistic processes, her emotions and that kind of thing. But sometimes it feels as if she's maybe even slightly oblivious to how talented she actually is, which is a humbling thing, and it just makes me warm to her music that much more. In her early days, the seething, blues-stained rock of that first trio was performed by a figure with an unnerving smile, which somehow makes the music seem even more violent, dangerous, and impossible to predict. Since the early 90s, Harvey has consistently created music that is wholly hers. You can hear that on every single piece of music she's created. She is not being pushed by some kind of management, label, other musicians. This music is hers, and she decides to make it. And I don't know how often you can actually say that about an artist who has so closely brushed the mainstream and the kind of mainstream success that she has received. They are records which can send shivers down your spine due to her ability of creating that swirling vortex of mood, that chilling vocal talent. I mean, she is one of the best artists of the last 20 years. I don't say that lightly. Before we kick off, a quote which I think sums up everything that this unpredictable artist is about. Making me into a role model is placing too much importance on what I call a work in progress. PJ HARVEY was born on the 9th of October 1969 in a small village called Corsecombe in Dorset, just off the south coast of England. In a background that sounds as anachronistically English as possible, her parents owned a stone quarry and also a small sheep farm, meaning Harvey grew up surrounded by huge stretches of pastoral quiet. Her mother was also a sculptor, something that Harvey almost pursued but instead ended up going down the path of music. Her upbringing itself, though, was defined by music. Her parents were avid music fans, always playing records by Dylan, the Rolling Stones, Canned Heat, Howlin' Wolf, even the bizarre delights of Captain Beefheart. And I just think that's a delicious juxtaposition, the idea of living on a sheep farm, stone quarry business, pastoral quiet, and then you've got the bluesy rock and roll oozing out of the speakers in her family home. And I think that is integral to understand when you are approaching the music of PJ HARVEY and her artistic footprint, because these two things were very important. Harvey learnt guitar and saxophone between the ages of 11 and 17. Saxophone was something she played a lot, but it was a sound that she couldn't bear to put in so much of her work until later on. I don't know why, I just suddenly developed an aversion to the saxophone. I can't bear the sound of it anymore. Maybe one day I'll like it again. Spoiler alert, she does, and we will get to the album where she starts playing saxophone in due course. Harvey has said that around 18 years old, she was considering a more practical career in something like English literature, where she'd be teaching, and that's around about the time she met her good friend John Parrish, someone who would be a long-time collaborator and very important in the musical history of PJ HARVEY. He also famously passed her a copy of Nick Cave's From Her to Eternity, an artist who would become much more prominent in Harvey's life later on down the line. Parrish's Bristol-based band Automatic Dlamini played Harvey's 18th birthday, and this is really where her musical journey truly began. Harvey ended up joining the band in '87 and going on tour with them. She got to play saxophone, guitar, backing vocals, and it really gave her an opportunity to start working on what kind of songwriter she was, but also what kind of performer she was. Getting to watch John Parrish perform and the other bandmates perform, she's said before, has been a big part of helping her gain confidence on stage and gain confidence as a songwriter and a musician. These were important formative years for Harvey, but in 1991 she made the decision to split from the band with Rob Ellis and Ian Oliver, who was quickly replaced by Steve Vaughan, to form what's come to be known as the PJ Harvey Trio. These first two records as the PJ Harvey Trio have come to be known as band releases because not only did they sound like a proper, brilliant rock trio, but also all three of them had creative input. It wasn't just about PJ Harvey, but you know, it's quite telling that the band decided to name the trio after Polly. I think they understood the power that she had as a songwriter and a musician, and where the focus for this band should absolutely be going. The trio signed with the 2 Pure label in 1991, and in 1992 put out their first ever album, Dry. Dry is an album with gouging intensity, introducing PJ Harvey as a voice and a lyricist not to be messed with, a presence who can take the satisfying bluesy rock grunge of this record and making it caustic but perceptive music, really elevating the sound on this album. And her lyrics show a poetic ability that seems improbable for someone who is only just releasing their first record. Debuts just shouldn't be this good. Also, it was apparently one of Kurt Cobain's 20 favourite records of all time. So, there you go. A record which in some ways capitalises on the grunge aesthetic owning the rock world in the early to mid-90s, though not quite as much as the second album. Harvey was just as interested in the dynamic potential of the music as she was the dynamic potential of the lyrics. It's not just extremes of loud and quiet. As a writer, I want extremes in the lyrics as well. Look no further for an example of feminine power and sexuality harnessed through the second single off of this record, Sheila Nagig. Now, Sheila Nagig is one of these, a stone carving of a woman exposing her genitals, and accompanied by the verse-chorus grunge dynamics of the band on this track, Harvey narrates a male partner who is notably reviled at her sexuality, snarling that he's calling her Sheila Nagig, you exhibitionist. The reason this track is so clever is the way that the lyricism challenges. So there's a number of different layers. So first off, you have Harvey rejecting the male with her rage, gonna wash that man right out of my hair. Quite a clear line there. But then he's also feeling pain at being rejected by him or feeling repressed by him in the first place and wanting him. Been trying to show you over and over. Look at these, my childbearing hips. Look at these, my ruby red, ruby lips. That confrontational language and the double meaning of the ruby red, ruby lips, which I don't think I really need to explain to any of you, it's just a very clever lyrical moment. It's just a little bit of lyrical prowess that's just gonna grow throughout her different expressions as a songwriter as she matures. The first single, Dress, which ended up being the third track on the album, is this stomping rock track, and it has this dusty string work on it that might remind some of you of Burn the Witch by Radiohead, and it has a chorus that's just going to glue itself to your brain for days. The track Hair has biblical references galore, referencing Samson and Delilah, and in turn spotlighting the way that the Bible often treats women as the underhand, snide usurpers you shouldn't trust. Oddly, many times Harvey has stated that she's not interested in feminism as a concept. But consistently her lyricism tells a different story, and Dry starts off that trend. I mean, it's quite clear what the lyrics seem to be pushing for on this record, and they have a strength and they're brilliant, but she doesn't want to be labelled as a feminist. Many times in interviews she's batted away those kind of questions, are you a feminist? And she just doesn't seem interested in them. And it's a strange contradiction with this artist, one that no one has really been able to properly understand. It's quite a breakneck record, and the first track that you can really catch your breath on is Plants and Rags, which begins quite calm. Then eventually all this string work starts coming in again, which is a great precursor for things to come with her instrumental work and the way that she starts experimenting with different instruments. But soon this track just develops into a brawny cacophony that becomes one of the best moments on the record for me. Here's a great bit of trivia for you, and don't worry, it is connected to this record. Kind of. So post-rock legend Slint put a call out for a female vocalist, and Harvey was one of the people to write back to them. Unfortunately, they never responded. One, what a bloody missed opportunity, because two, her vocal presence on Dry is powerful, disorderly, and dangerous. Now imagine that vocal presence on a record like Spiderland, on tracks like Nosferatu Man or Washer. Dry is a fantastic record, musically burly with a poetic agility in its vocalist. Musically, it's also a snapshot of Harvey's life at the time. She was now living in London, which is very different from the Dorset South Coast, let me tell you. And she split up with her boyfriend, photographer Joe Dilworth. She was just struggling to live in London. I imagine it was all a little bit overwhelming, especially with the newfound attention on her and her band. The intensity and attention would only increase tenfold after the success of Dry though, with Island Records signing the band and flying them out to Minnesota to work with Steve Albini on their follow-up sophomore record, Rid of Me, released in 1993. I don't think I have to talk about Steve Albini too much on this video, the man behind Rape Man, Shellac, Big Black, producing records for bands as influential as Nirvana, Godspeed, La Bradford, the Jesus Lizard, Early Slint. I mean, I'll probably just do a guide at some point. Let's just do that. What Albini succeeded in doing was taking a razor and sharpening Harvey's corrosive sound, charting a course to even more destructive sounding tracks. Albini's great at bringing out the full scuzzy potential of a band, making them sound as live as possible, and Rid of Me is a great example of that. Whilst people tend to use grunge as a signifier to talk about Rid of Me, which I think is apt for the most part, I'd rather call it a bluesy post-punk record. It's aggressive, heartfelt, and wounded. It's an album that's a force to be reckoned with. Albini's production approach was perfect for Harvey, who was determined to get a much rawer sound out of this record than the previous one. I wanted to get a sound that was as live as possible, and a lot of the blues records and the Led Zepp records were recorded live. The music is heading even more in that direction. That's what I want the next album to sound like. The economy and dynamic ferocity of the first track on the album, title track Rid of Me, immediately shows how these recordings harness space more. You can pick out the sounds of plectrums on guitar strings, the fizz of a snare wire. It keeps the listener in anticipation before the trio kicks those power chords into overdrive. Harvey's voice firstly a histrionic whisper, now that feral snarl that we know from the previous record. The track Legs finds Harvey experimenting with her vocal range more than before, scooping up to these high notes with a newfound theatrical streak, occasionally sounding like cries of pain or anguish. The track Man-Sized Sextet takes that hint of theatricality and really steps it up a notch with this discordant string section that rubs up against Harvey's fragile vocal delivery, and the lyrics make everything feel even more uncomfortable. Silence my lady head. Get girl out of my head. Douse hair with gasoline, set it light and set it free. If it sounds like she's singing through gritted teeth on this track, that might be because she had this newfound obsession with ventriloquism, something that her and Albini discussed extensively during the recording sessions for Rid of Me. So it's quite likely she sang the song like this, and I won't talk anymore like this because it probably sounds stupid. The record also contains a slightly more traditional version of Man-Size, a trio recording, which Albini did, because Albini didn't do the sextet version. I think that was done in London. But anyway, the more traditional version really does draw your attention to those apparent feminist lyrics, despite Harvey's own vocal assertion that she doesn't think about gender when she's writing. If this isn't a satire of macho identity, I don't know what is, to be honest. I'm coming up man-sized, skinned alive. I want to fit. I've got to get man-sized. I'm heading on, handsome. Got my leather boots on. Rub Till It Bleeds is a brilliantly nasty track. Those Albini captured chords are despicably distorted, the ball-busting drums, and then those lyrics about aggressive mutual masturbation. Sweet babe, let me stroke it. Take, I'm giving. God's truth, I'm not lying. And you'll believe me. I'm calling you in, and I'll make it better. I'll rub till it bleeds. It's eroticism with this air of hostility. It's uncomfortable, and it is just a brilliant moment on this record. Highway 61 Revisited is a great reimagining of the Dylan track, and Dylan as an artist is someone who Harvey has looked up to all her life, from when her parents played her those records when she was a child, but also later on using his music and thinking about the way he structured music and how she might approach her own musical structures. I learned so much from working on the cover Highway 61 by Bob Dylan. His writing skill is just incredible, and although I don't know if I'll ever get there, it's something I aspire to. That's why I wanted to include the track on the album. He's just an incredible songwriter. At this point, Harvey had made a name for herself, cultivated an image, and much of that is a product of the barefaced confidence and aggression on Rid of Me, which I do think is a wicked record. Probably more a snapshot of the 20th century male-dominated music press that was incapable of talking about female artists without resorting to cliche and stereotype. But there was an air about Harvey at the time, partly due to the sexual aggression in the lyricism, the aggression of the music itself, but Harvey herself has talked about this in interviews, that she felt as if the press were labelling her as some kind of axe-wielding cow bitch from hell, and those were words that she used. All of that stuff surprised me. It certainly made me learn a lot about how people interpret things. It's at the point that it goes on sale in the shops that you have to relinquish control, and I'm quite happy to do that. Rock music does a lot of things. I know what it does inside of me. It's a turn-on. It's physical. but it can also be funny. At the start, I was surprised that people were taking things very seriously, that I'd been singing with my tongue in my cheek. I find this stuff about me being the ultimate ball breaker quite funny now, quite amusing. Towards the end of '93, 4-track Demos was released, which contains much rougher versions of the tracks on Rid of Me on 4-track, unsurprisingly given the title. It also contains a couple of extra tracks. There's the great raucous M-Bike, which is all about a boyfriend who's more obsessed with his motorbike than he is with his girlfriend. That's a really nice cut, I like that one. Harvey's playing all of the instruments on this release, and because they're 4-track recordings, it really does feel quite intimate. It's interesting hearing the tracks from Rid of Me in this slightly more intimate context. For her third album, 1995's To Bring You My Love, she decided to split from the trio. There was pressures in the band from touring together and things like that, and she decided to go it alone. This meant that this record was to be known by some people as the first truly solo PJ Harvey record. I think that every album, every song I write for me has to feel like it's moving forward or trying to cover ground that I haven't covered before. And I had felt like I had exhausted the sound that a 3-piece could make, and I was dying to experiment with new instruments and new people. After the whirlwind success and glut of media attention that the first 2 records brought, Harvey purchased a house in Dorset, not too far from her parents, that was very isolated and surrounded by fields, and started writing her new record there. What I believe is the greatest PJ Harvey record we've had to date. A record which embodies its cover art photograph of Harvey floating in the water in a red dress with matching coloured lipstick. To Bring You My Love finds Harvey drifting through the murky waters of Delta blues, playing with her image and embracing theatricality more than ever before. Dry and Rid of Me absolutely had flavours of blues, but To Bring You My Love envelops itself with this idea. Now, I'm not saying that Delta Blues seeps from this record and sounds like a dead ringer for Delta Blues artists, but Harvey's approach to the songwriting on this record does evoke that soulful feeling of blues music, southern blues music, people like Leadbelly, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker. It's not like she's trying to hide it with that slow burn opening title track, the plodding blues riff as Harvey sings. Climbed over mountains, travelled the sea, cast out of heaven, cast down on my knees. I've lain with the devil, cursed God above, forsaken heaven to bring you my love. This record was produced by Flood, who's produced records for artists like Nick Cave, New Order, U2, 9 Inch Nails, but it was also produced by John Parrish of Automatic Dlamini, the person who Harvey was introduced to at 18, and through this record they really struck up a strong working relationship, to the point where Harvey often refers to Parrish as her musical soulmate. Whereas Dry and Rid of Me were passionate bursts of anger and energy, To Bring You My Love channels this into this constantly bubbling gothic tension. It's a confidence in form and delivery that comes through completely on that first track, but also a track like Long Snake Moan. It's like a rock smash of a track, but it has the confidence to take time in unfurling, and that's how this record feels. That's what the cover art evokes. I really do love this record. The slight growl in her intonation on Come On Billy is backgrounded by acoustic guitar, strings, and jangly percussion, and it's a good example of why Harvey probably wanted to move away from that trio setup. Her writing has given an even greater opportunity to come alive with fresh instrumental lines, piano, organ, ebow, marimba, the chimes on the track Teklo. He came riding fast like a phoenix out of fire flames. He came dressed in black with a cross bearing my name. He came bathed in light and the splendour and glory. I can't believe what the Lord has finally sent me. Lyrically, this is lofty, it's biblical, evangelical, fire and brimstone stuff. It's no surprise that she was called more gothic on this record and likened to someone like Nick Cave or Tom Waits. Speaking of which, in '96 Harvey collaborated with Nick Cave on one of my favourite Nick Cave and the Bad Seed albums, Murder Ballads, specifically on the track Henry Lee and on the closing Bob Dylan cover Death Is Not the End. Out of this collaboration sparked a romantic relationship which was apparently quite brief, and Harvey called it off. There isn't much information on the brief period these two spent together, other than of course The Boatman's Call, Nick Cave's 1997 record, is at least in part a response to having to let go of PJ Harvey. A very sad record, but I'm not really here to talk about Nick Cave. If you want to find out more about Nick Cave, then you need to go and watch my guide to Nick Cave. Little plug for you. To Bring You My Love was a huge success, earning Harvey Grammy nominations, sitting right at the top of Album of the Year lists. PJ Harvey was a force to be reckoned with, which is why the next record, the collaboration with John Parrish, which was released in 1996 called Dance Hall at Low's Point, was all the braver because coming off of that success, you'd think she would have done something more like that, and instead she does this avant-garde collaboration, which is stuffed with these guitar-led curiosities like the track Tour, or there's that organ-drenched track Is That All There Is. And the record company weren't happy with it. They were worried that this was going to affect the trajectory that she'd managed to create with these first 3 records. But it's just proof of her bravery as an artist and the fact that she does what she wants to do. No one's going to tell her what to do as an artist, and that can only be a positive thing. It's a project definitely worth checking out, especially as we get a second John Parrish collaboration in 2009. It's really interesting to see how both artists have matured and the different ways they work together on these records. It also pushed Harvey in terms of her songwriting, a point that she's been keen to make in the past. People don't even count that, yet that's the record I'm really proud of. It was an enormous turning point. Lyrically, it moved me into areas I'd never been to before. Faced with John's music, which is so different to my own, it just made me write lyrics in a very different way and structure songs in a different way. If you were thinking of skipping it, well, don't, because she's just told you why you shouldn't, so listen. In 1998, PJ Harvey released her 4th album, Is This Desire, not only a chronological successor to Bring You My Love, but also a spiritual sequel, one which experimented with the instrumental side of her music far more. Produced by Flood again, on the surface one of the most obvious new elements in the music are the electronic sounds, something that to this point has never entered Polly Jean Harvey's musical world. The drums on the Sky Lit Up have an industrial, processed clatter to them. The bass line on Electric Light is mechanical and overbearing, and there's no other sound in the scape other than Harvey's spectral voice and then Rob Ellis's feather-light kit work. I mean, he's barely hitting those drums. The Wind has a trip-hoppy backline, crisp sampled drums and deep bass accompany Harvey's double-tracked voice, one of them whispering, the other one singing. Catherine liked high places, high up on the hills. A place for making noises, like whales. Noises like the whales. Here she built a chapel, with her image on the wall. That trip-hop style really suits her voice, something that Tricky must have realised when he invited her onto his track Broken Homes to go on his 1998 record, Angels with Dirty Faces. As you might be able to tell from that lyrical excerpt of The Wind, her subject matter is as poetic as it was on the previous record, this time talking about St. Catherine's devotion to Jesus and her refusal to get married, meaning that she was sentenced to death on a torture wheel, the torture wheel of the second verse. Elsewhere, other tracks keep away from the electronic inflections. You know, it's not in every single part of this record, like that gorgeous simplistic opener, Angeline, for example. PJ Harvey has such a killer vocal talent. Like on the chorus for Angeline, she sounds effortless, but she still retains that fizzing energy, the energy she's had ever since the first record, Dry. She's just refined her sound on every single record. I just think her voice is one of the most wonderful things in music. And to her testament as an artistic presence, those new electronic elements never derail her. You can still tell that this is a PJ Harvey record, electronic sounds or not. On a track like No Girl So Sweet, the electronic percussion marries perfectly with those post-punk guitars, and Harvey's lyrics come across as aggressive, damaged, and romantic in one fell swoop. Said, I don't mind if you take me down, and I don't mind if you break it all. But how much more can you take from me? How much more can you take from me? I'd like to take you inside my head. I'd like to take you inside of me. You came from heaven, is all he said. You came from heaven and came here to me, and I love you. Don't even get me started on that finale. This whole record is bookended with 2 beautiful slow burn tracks. You have Angeline, which I've already talked about, and the title track, Closer, which has distorted guitar and this reverb final section, which is so disarming. Such a beautiful way to end a record. And it's another example of how in control of her sound PJ Harvey is. She just knows exactly how to construct a record and how to make the listener feel a certain way. Like some kind of mercurial actor, her voice can sound fragile and questioning like that final track, or it can have that jagged bite of the previous track and that sound that we know from previous PJ Harvey records. So she can both sound on this record like she does and doesn't know what desire is, which is great because it all just comes back round to that title. It's just a finished piece of work that all comes together so well in the end. Often overlooked after To Bring You My Love, but I would say almost as good. Though the title of her 2000 record, Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea, is thought to be about the dual writing locations for these tracks, so New York and Dorset, she actually talked in an interview with Lindsay Baker in 2000 about the Jungian notion of the land being the conscious and the sea being the subconscious. It seems to me that we spend a lot of our lives trying to get back to that simplicity, the vibrant imagination we had as kids. It seems like she's suggesting, therefore, that the record is implicitly connected to the happiness you feel in childhood, or trying to attain that happiness, which is why the record feels brighter and more beautiful than anything she's ever done, which did seem to be a direct approach, an approach that she decided to take for this record. Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea is Harvey's most streamlined record to date. It's the most mainstream, if you'd like to use that phrase. And that wasn't a push from the record company, from another artist, from a producer. This was all her. Having experimented with some dreadful sounds on Is This Desire and To Bring You My Love, where I was really looking for dark, unsettling, nauseous-making sounds, Stories from the City was the reaction. I thought, no, I want absolute beauty. I want this album to sing and fly and be full of reverb and lush layers of melody. I want it to be my beautiful, sumptuous, lovely piece of work. Mick Harvey, ex-Bad Seed and Birthday Party member who had been involved in Harvey's work since To Bring You My Love, often as a bassist, he jumped on production duties along with Rob Ellis, who in an interview backed up the fact that the creation of this record and the more streamlined process, the more lush sounds, was all her doing. She was on a very particular path there. She was making quite a straight record in a funny way. I'm not quite sure how she got to that point because it didn't seem very typical of her, to be honest. But you know, she's a real zone person. She gets into the zone of what she wants to do, and that becomes the focus very strongly for what happens with each project. Perhaps there's something in that Jungian idea that Harvey talks about, because there is a binary to this record. It's a sumptuously beautiful record, but it also has that requisite PJ darkness, the darkness we came to love on records like Dry, Rid of Me, To Bring You My Love. Very much her widescreen moment. This really pushed the music of PJ Harvey into the mainstream world, way more than ever before. It won her the Mercury Music Prize, won loads of awards, was Album of the Year for so many publications. You know, PJ Harvey was all of a sudden an even bigger star than she had previously been. Big Exit opens the record, and you can notice the cleaner production on this track, but it doesn't sacrifice the strength that she's had on previous records. There's that stamping 6/4 beat, there's the rowdy guitars, and you know, they're just more expansive than they were before. The whole sound of the track is more expansive. Harvey's vocals sound even stronger on this record after the mix of styles on Is This Desire, probably a product of going in and knowing that she wanted to make this very particular kind of record. The layers of guitar on the whore's hustle and the hustler's whore shimmer, and the lyrics portray Harvey's thoughts on the bustle of the city in comparison to her very pastoral home life. The whore's hustle and the hustler's whore. Too many people out of love. The whore's hustler and the hustler's whore. This city's ripped right to the core. In someone else's hands, I feel like the clean guitar chords and gentle beat of A Place Called Home might be a bit soft rock, a bit blur, but with Harvey's vocal presence and approach, she just keeps tracks sounding at the cutting edge. She just has that ability, and also that lyrical prowess. It works wonders. I walk, I wade, through full lands and lonely. I stumble, with you I wait, to be born again. With love comes the day, just hold on to me. Noticeably more romantic and less gothic, less unsettling than her previous records. We had the gorgeous duet with Tom York on This Mess We're In, and he actually turns up on tracks One Line and Beautiful Feeling as well. It's a formidable vocal pairing, especially on This Mess We're In, and you can tell that York has an immense respect for Harvey's talent. His falsetto is underneath Harvey singing The City Sun Sets Over Me, and it's just one of those great moments in music. To summarise, you can absolutely see why this record gets the recognition that it does. It shows a maturation of Harvey's songwriting, just a development of her songwriting skills and her approach, and also it's just full of beautiful alternative pop tracks. Around this time, Harvey worked with Josh Homme on his Desert Sessions project, this long-term project that's been going on for ages and might still be going on, but he hasn't done anything with it for ages. It's just basically a load of musicians getting together and having a lot of fun with making different kinds of tracks, and she was on Desert Sessions 9 and 10, so if you want to go and listen to those records, you can hear some of the stuff that she was doing. Listen to Powdered Wig Machine for Harvey's formidable voice and Homme's falsetto harmonising underneath. She also worked on Marianne Faithfull's 17th record, Before the Poison, writing and performing on a number of tracks, also a record that Mr. Nick Cave worked on. So with her next record, 2004's Her, she strips away the gloss and the sheen of Stories from the City. You know, it's a sound that she could have quite easily ridden for the rest of her career with how successful it was. but that's not how Polly Jean does things. No, over a 2-year period, she self-produced a collection of tracks that would end up being this record. Rootsier, bluesier, more minimalistic production. It's a record that can often be forgot about due to its unenviable task of following up that smash hit record, but it does avoid direct comparisons with that by being completely different. What I will say is that although there are some cracking songs on Ah Her, it doesn't quite work for me as a fully realised piece of work. The change up from the second track Shame, which has the guitar and accordion combination, muted drums that almost sound like beatboxing, to that hacking guitar attack and linear drum pattern on Who the Fuck is just a bit too much of a whiplash moment for me. What it sounds like is a collection of kind of intimate recordings, a myriad of ideas and expressions from an artist who's already shown us so many different sides. Perhaps it just felt necessary to her to make this kind of record, one which takes lots of different approaches, but as a final piece of work perhaps just doesn't quite come together in the same magnificent way that her previous records have. I love the track The Desperate Kingdom of Love for its hushed tones. The tuned percussion of You Come Through almost sounds Waitsian. I do think this is the weakest record she's put out to date, but I wonder if I'm alone in that, so let me know in the comment section. Do you think Ah Her is her weakest record, or am I not giving it enough credit? In 2006, the Peel Sessions was released, a lovely little treasure trove of live recordings recorded on John Peel's radio show from 1991 all the way up until 2000. And then there's one final track, You Come Through, from Ah Her, which was recorded as a tribute to Peel himself, who died in 2004. It's a great opportunity to hear the mutation of Harvey's music from 91 to 2004 and hear some of these tracks in a live setting. I'll always think it's worth, if you're going to check out the discography of an artist, to try and seek out those live recordings to hear what they sound like live. I just think that's an important part of coming to understand what an artist is all about. Next record, 2007's White Chalk, is a different story entirely and another side of Harvey's musical journey. A piano-based record with melancholy unheard of so far in her discography, with a kind of dramatic, not theatricality, but there's a dramatic weight to it, which reminds me of a record like To Bring You My Love, just not the same musically. I was trying to not cover the same ground. I was looking and looking to find out, therefore, what that new process was going to be. A lot of the time I was just playing by ear, not doing anything that I'd felt like I'd done before. She really does not cover the same ground, from learning the piano from scratch just to play it on this record, to the airy high vocal tone she musters that gives the whole record this elegant serenity. Harvey made a distinctive effort to not only approach this record differently from a songwriting perspective, but also her vocal style. It's a very pure and very easily accessible voice. It doesn't involve much other than mind placement. If you place your mind in that area of singing, it happens. These new forms of expression for Harvey, learning the piano, different kind of vocal style, allowed her to move into a different headspace with her songwriting and achieve things that she'd never achieved before. And as such, White Chalk sounds so different from anything she's ever done, and it is a beautiful record. The recordings themselves aren't polished like on Stories from the City. In fact, they're a bit closer to Ah Her. You can hear the beaters of the piano, you can hear snare wires fizzing, the sharp intake of breath that Harvey takes before a fluttering motif. Produced by Flood and John Parrish, they help capture this entirely new side of Harvey. I think it's one of the highlights of her discography, and I don't think I'm really alone in thinking that. It has a strange beauty that it's almost hard to put your finger on, because it's kind of strange. There's a ghostly chamber music vibe, not just from that Victorian spirit photography-esque image of the front cover, but Harvey's use of harp, zither, banjo. The title track itself has a folky delivery, far and away from the Harvey we came to know in the 90s. One important instrumental addition to this record is the auto harp, which is one of these things. She apparently first played on an auto harp when she was 4 or 5 years old, just playing around in play school, and she'd always had them around. But one day she was buying a second-hand auto harp in Notting Hill Gate. I love this story. And while she was buying it, she realised there was someone standing next to her who said, "Oh, hi Polly, how are you?" And it was Brian Eno buying foot pedals. I mean, not particularly a relevant story, but I just love it. Harvey started writing on the auto harp for White Chalk, and it became an integral part of her music-making process. It appears on all of her subsequent albums, and by the sounds of it, she's completely in love with it as an instrument, as she said many times on different interviews. The piano arpeggios on Grow, Grow, Grow are part of that dramatic streak that I mentioned earlier. Like, there is a grace to this album, but it's not understated in moments. That is a very obvious moment of fluttering beauty, I think. It's a moment that commands your attention as Harvey's vocal soars over this chamber-like instrumentation. I still obsess about White Chalk, Polly's 2007 album. And rightly so, Tom, because this album is a wonderful piece of work. Once you start listening to this, you'll be taken in to its beguiling world. Again, just another entirely left turn in the world of Polly Jean Harvey's music, and I'm so glad we have it. In 2009, PJ Harvey and John Parrish released their second collaborative record, A Woman, a Man Walked By, and it's a wickedly weird album, tapping into some of the avant-garde sounds that were on Dancehall at Lau's Point. It's also a good wake-up call for anyone who thought that Harvey had completely abandoned her more caustic vocal performances after the spectral quality of White Chalk. The title track, a raucous blues song, has Harvey as riotous as ever, ending with this chant of "stick it up your fucking arse." Which brings us to 2011, when PJ Harvey releases her 8th LP, Let England Shake. Recorded in a church in Dorset and produced by Flood, Mick Harvey and John Parrish, Let England Shake is an affecting concept album about the horrors of conflict and ideas of nationhood in the First World War. Another huge change-up in PJ Harvey's writing style. I wanted to write such an album for years and years. I've always been extremely affected by what's going on in the world at a very deep level. I find myself extremely upset many days by what's happening. I think it's the nature of being an artist. No matter what medium you work in, you're very sensitive to what's happening. And you have to be. You have to absorb things and articulate it and find a way of processing it, putting it out there again. Throughout her writing career, Harvey has always had a way with words. She just knows how to put syntax together, put dazzles. But with Let England Shake, she finally felt as if she had the confidence and ability to tackle a much more difficult subject, the blight of war on the human race. In terms of the lyrics of this record, they read like poetry. For example, "The West's asleep, let England shake. Weighted down with silent dead, I fear our blood won't rise again, won't rise again." With that opening track, Let England Shake, you already get the feeling that Harvey is tapping more into ideas of the present day England than she is about wars gone past. And in quite a scary way, this album's starting to feel more and more prescient in Britain's post-Brexit landscape. The xenophobic islander is taken on in The Last Living Rose. Goddamn Europeans, take me back to beautiful England, and the grey, damp filthiness of ages, and battered books, and fog rolling down behind the mountains. On the graveyards and Dead Sea captains, let me walk through the stinking alleys, to the music of drunken beatings, past the Thames River, glistening like gold, hastily sold for nothing. Harvey was careful not to make what she called dogmatic, chest-beating protest music, and so the music itself is much more uplifting. It incorporates the fluttering tones of mellotron, the warm brass of trombone, breathy tones of saxophone, performed by Harvey for the first time on record. All and Everyone takes its lyrical subject matter from the Battle of Gallipoli in 1915. Death hung in the smoke and clung to 400 acres of useless beachfront, a bank of red earth dripping down. Death is now and now and now. Death was everywhere, in the air and in the sounds, coming off of the mounds of Bolton's Ridge. Ooh, death's anchorage. Those words are heavy, undeniably, but the folky ballad of the music makes it less of a lamentation and more thoughtful as a track. It makes you think about what the imagery evokes, and with that pleading tone of Harvey, perhaps it suggests something to you as a listener. Don't let this happen again. Let's stop war from ravaging our humanity over and over again. And that's essentially what Let England Shake is about. And I think it's an incredibly well put together record, which has a concept, it sticks with it, and it wholeheartedly pulls it off. A huge success. This record won Harvey the Mercury Music Prize for the second time, first artist to ever do that. Critics fell over themselves praising this record, and you can see why. The hype is justified. After the poetic grace of Let England Shake and the very real-world evocation of that imagery, Harvey's next project took her even further as a kind of journalist within her music. Working with the photojournalist and filmmaker Seamus Murphy, who she worked with on a number of different visual projects during Let England Shake, they travelled to Kosovo, Afghanistan and DC to visit impoverished communities. If you want to find out a bit more about these trips, the photos that were taken, the experiences were had, you need to check out The Hollow of the Hand, which is a book that PJ Harvey released with Seamus Murphy, which contains a lot of her poetry and also the photos that Seamus Murphy took. These communities and their danger of collapse are directly tied to government policy, and so her 2016 record, The Hope 6 Demolition Project, becomes the most overtly political album of her career. That title was named after the Hope 6 project by the US government, an initiative which was designed or intended to help the most impoverished communities and make them better. But what it does in the end is actually rip those communities apart even more. It's been likened by some people to social cleansing. So it's a loaded concept that Harvey's playing with here. The opening track, The Community of Hope, introduces this topic from the off. Here's the Hope 6 demolition project, stretching down to Benning Road, a well-known pathway of death, at least that's what I'm told. And here's the one sit-down restaurant in Ward 7, nice. Okay, now this is just drug town, just zombies. But that's just life. The music operates similarly to Let England Shake. It's quite unifying, upbeat in its approach, and what that does is it further ironizes the hope that these people are feeling in their communities, the community projects that are trying to stand up to DC, DC which is intent on ignoring these people and potentially destroying their lives. Although Harvey clearly feels strongly about this topic, she doesn't see herself as a journalist per se. I still call myself a songwriter, really. I gather information for songs. My biggest drive in my life is to want to sing to people. That's the way I get across things that interest me and things that concern me. The instrumental similarities to Let England Shake are refined by Parrish and Flood on production duties, taking the sax tones, James Johnston's Warren Ellis-esque violin performances, and Harvey's refined tone to make it the exact project that PJ wanted it to be. Chain of Keys is a track I absolutely love, primarily due to the baritone sax that completely shakes the entire track. The track has a nice blues twang to it as well. It reminds me kind of her earlier work because of that bluesy sound, but obviously distilled through her matured songwriting approach. It's a really great track. The heartbreaking final track, Dollar Dollar, is based on an encounter Harvey had with a begging child on the streets of Afghanistan. The track begins with a recording of a busy street, people talking and shouting, as we get this slow blend of organ, mellotron and variophone, which is cushioning Harvey's voice that sounds tear-stricken at the plight of this child. All my words get swallowed in the rearview glass, a face pockmarked and hollow. He's saying dollar, dollar. An undeniably heartbreaking finale to this record, a record which has a sense of purpose, it has a political weight to it, and it's something that she's never done in this way before. If this record has anything else to show you, it's that Harvey is forever intrepid as a songwriter. She is determined to show different sides to her songwriting process, different approaches to making music, making her art, and she just does it again here, completely differently to anything she's ever done before. Her experimentation went so far on this record that for a time you could go to Somerset House in London and through one-way glass watch her write a lot of these tracks with other musicians. If Harvey was once fearful of writing about important topics like war and socio-economic deprivation, she isn't now. And if she was once very close-knit about every facet of her recording process, perhaps this is part of her conquering her fears as an artist. She is forever developing as an artist, as a musician, and this is just one of those examples of her doing that. I wonder if, based on these last two records, the next PJ Harvey record will be heavily politicised, or perhaps it will just be another left turn again, something we could never predict. I do think that PJ Harvey is an unpredictable artist, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And that is the end of my guide. I still think we have some amazing pieces of work to look forward to from PJ Harvey. I really do. Just everything that she's done in her career so far has been so exciting. I'm going to end on a quote, as I always do. I feel like the most beautiful thing about a song is that it is something that goes out there in the universe and people use it in the way that they need it in their lives. Underestimate PJ Harvey's music at your peril. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this guide to PJ Harvey. Lots of other guides available. If you're new to this channel, I've done Ortega, I've done Björk, I've done Aphex Twin, Death Grips, loads of different people, so please check those out. Please come and join me on the Deep Cuts Discord on Tuesday at 10 o'clock BST, where we'll be listening to PJ Harvey's To Bring You My Love. Love that record, so that'll be a fun listening party to do. As ever, if you've got any questions, put it in the comment section below. Please talk about PJ Harvey, talk about your favourite PJ Harvey records, get some discussions going. I'll be back next week. See you then.